everyone, and thank you for joining this mining webinar titled The Role of Leadership in a Modern Mine. My name is Araceli Sanchez, and I am the Digital Marketing Strategist with the Mining Center of Excellence, and I will serve as your moderator for today's event. Now, before we begin the presentation, we have a few announcements for you. Now, we do encourage you to submit your questions and comments for our presenter, so use the Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen. We will use this in order to ask questions in the final 10 to 15 minutes of this presentation. Now, this event is being recorded for on-demand purposes. All previously recorded mining webinar recordings can be found at cat.com/mining webinars. Last but not least is a quick safety message from us. During this event, please keep safety top of mind. So you can do that by freeing your workspace of any trip hazards, ensuring your workstation is ergonomically correct, take frequent breaks for your physical and your mental health, and then always be aware of your emergency procedures. Now, I'm honored today to introduce our presenter. Jenny Krasny is a Senior Operational Risk Consultant with Caterpillar Safety Services. She works directly with organizations to help manage human-centered change when implementing disruptive technologies. She has almost 20 years of local and international consulting experience with some of the world's most respected mining, construction, engineering, and manufacturing organizations. She has expertise in strategy development, culture change, leadership development, and change management. Now, Jenny has a passion for bringing the human back into the workplace to move organizations and leaders from seeing people as assets to humans with ideas, courage, and a willingness to contribute. Without further ado, here's Jenny Krasny. Jenny, take it away.
Gosh, thank you, Ara. What an introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and evening to all who have joined the conversation or are listening in the recording. It's a pleasure to have you join me as I reflect on the role of leadership in a modern mine. What we might do before we get started is I want to hear from you. I'd love to know, if you were to reflect on your time in the mining industry, how much change have you experienced over the years?
All right, so thank you for that, Jenny. Now is the chance for our audience to interact with you. So you should be seeing a question on your screen. The question is, how much has changed in the world of mining for you? So go ahead and fill that out. Let us know what your thoughts are. The responses are, maybe there's no change. Things have remained the same. There's been minimal change, and any changes that you've seen have been small or minor. There has been some change to the way you work, and things are starting to shift. Or maybe there's been a huge change and the landscape is extremely different. So go ahead and answer the question on your screen. We'll give you a couple of seconds to get that done. All right, let's go ahead and see how the audience feels. I can see maybe eight people have submitted. That's about 30% of the attendees. We're still accepting responses, so go ahead and answer the question on your screen. All right, Jenny, let's go ahead and take a look. Let's see what the audience has to say.
All right. What are the numbers saying? You see numbers on your side, Ara?
I do. Hopefully you're seeing it on your end there.
Oh, there we are. Well, that's I'm getting a lot of feedback, majority being that we've had some significant change. The landscape is quite different. And about a quarter of responses saying, yep, some change, and it's shifted somewhat. Lovely to hear that. I mean, it's certainly the experience that I've had. If I was to reflect on my rendezvous, my very first rendezvous in the mining industry, which was around 20 years ago, I would say that the world today is not the world that I first encountered. About 20 years ago, I remember standing with an executive leader on an empty paddock. The paddock used to have been a dairy farm at some stage. And we mused together about what this piece of land was going to be, the kind of mine site it was going to be, the kind of leaders that would make up the operation, and the kind of culture we wanted to have. And then over the next few years, I had the opportunity to support that operation, selecting people to work there, helping develop them to be the kind of people that the mining manager wanted to have on site. We also did a lot of work around culture development and business improvement along the way. It was a really, really rewarding experience. And like many in our audience have said, yep, some things have changed, but in fact, there's also been a few things that have remained the same. One of the things that strikes me the most is how we experience time. I don't know about you, but it certainly felt a little bit more like we could have been able to smell the roses. And what I mean by that is, while meeting operational targets has always been a focus, and leaders are never short and have never been short of something to do, it really felt back then that there was more time to connect, more time to engage with workers, and even engage in some of those water cooler conversations that, unfortunately, in the time we find ourselves today, are very difficult to have. Today, upon walking into a mine, sometimes it feels like I've walked into an arena where I'm watching racing cars roar around a track. Few people manage to stop and talk. And when they do, they have very short, very sharp conversations. Most are done standing up, and there's no time to linger. While the message of operations is not to rush, take your time, nothing is more important than your safety, at the same time, there's also a strong sense of urgency in the air. All priorities feel urgent, and often it's the loudest voice that is getting the focus. When I walked into my first mine site all those years ago, pre-shift meetings were conducted with a whiteboard. I'm sure some of you can remember this, with a whiteboard with numbers and letters and pieces of equipment allocated to specific people. There was a picture of the mine on the wall, usually behind where the supervisor was standing, and there was a piece of paper in the hands of the supervisor who would read what was happening for that shift, what was the focus for the day. Each operator also carried a pen and a notebook in their top pocket and wrote down the information that was relevant to them. Shift handovers between supervisors involved a conversation and a handing over of a form that detailed a lot, sometimes very little, what had happened during the last shift and what now needs to be considered in the oncoming shift. Sometimes the art was to decipher the scribble of the supervisor that had tried to complete his paperwork just before the incoming supervisor had arrived. And while pens and notepads haven't gone away, screens and tablets and PowerPoint presentations and displays of big data, charts, trends dominate most of the pre-shift discussions I'm a part of. Today, we have access to more information from areas that we would have otherwise not had, and more timely information at that than ever before. Navigating the sea of the ones and the zeros, understanding what it all means, is now the challenge to overcome. Walking into my first mine, while there was an eye on the future, much of the effort was all about the actions that needed to occur, the targets to be met on this shift, on this swing, before the end of month, or whatever the reporting period was that we were in. While there was a high-level plan, which all teams were supposed to be working towards achieving, it also felt too far away. Responding to what was in front of us, right in front of our noses, in the here and now, seemed to be the order of the day. And not only was it fulfilling, it certainly kept everyone on their toes. Today, while the short-term targets are still of a lot of concern, getting through the shift, getting through the swing, getting through the reporting period is still a reality for many operations all around the globe. The long game today is never far away at the managerial and the leadership tables. Today, it's even appearing in pre-shift meetings. Another notable difference that I've encountered is a bigger focus on this concept of the social license to operate. While all mining operations have always been sensitive to the communities in which they are located, the volume seems to have been significantly turned up over the last few years, inviting leaders to look beyond the perimeter of their lease and into the social, cultural, environmental, and political landscapes in which they operate. The last change I want to call out before we talk to the so what of this webinar is the gradual shift from individualism or me leadership to we leadership. In my early years in mining, it seemed that so many supervisors and managers were largely interested, well, in themselves and what their department was doing, with very little visible, at least, concern for what was happening in another department. Unless, of course, the work of another department impacted their own plans in a negative way. While some of this concern continues today, the survival of the fittest is becoming a whole of mine problem rather than isolated to a leader and just their team. Many years ago, I had a stint as a sports psychologist, and something that I noticed was just as an athlete wants to be revered, no athlete wants to be the hero of a losing team. This idea has underpinned many elite sports teams around the world, yet for some reason, this concept has been slow to reach the business world, where individual targets have prevailed. So welcome to the modern mine, where site performance is dependent on the seamless interplay of people, data, process, and systems with a keen eye on the future. The modern mine is characterized by a landscape of interdependencies of people, teams, and departments, and underpinned by interconnected systems that offer greater visibility for all. With various levels of automation, digitization, technology characterizing a modern mine, there is a need for planned, strategic action, a lot of proactive work. A reactive here and now culture only serves to get in the way of productivity and efficiency gains, not to mention hindering safety aspirations. Even a casual drive into the mine today needs to be planned and built into activities occurring in the pit, or be at risk of causing unnecessary delays or stoppages. In the modern mine, communication and collaboration is an absolute must, as is the standardization of processes between crews and departments. Also essential for a modern mine, with its focus on the future, is a shift from a training mentality to a learning orientation. A shift from developing people for their current context to one that prepares people for the future, equipping them with the skills to foresee and respond, and almost building their resilience, a prepared culture. So with this also comes a need for training to be elevated as a necessary activity and not a checkbox occurrence, merely intended to meet a compliance obligation. As you listen and ponder on that list, here's your next chance to engage in a poll. And the question is, what might be the biggest challenge you are likely to face as you consider stepping into a modern mine?
All right, Jenny, thank you for that. So everybody, here's another poll on your screen. Let us know, where do you see your biggest challenge in stepping into a modern mine? We have a couple of options here for you, and we'd like to hear from you. Is it that interconnectivity of departments? Is it acting proactively and strategically? Is it effective communication and collaboration, learning mindset, standardized processes, using technology, or is it accountability through the organization? So you're seeing that poll pop up on your screen right now. We'd like to hear from you. Go ahead and fill it out. And while everyone is doing that, it's a lot to ponder and think about, right? Where do you see your biggest challenge when you step into a modern mind? So people have to think about the past, the present, the future. And we'll see what everyone has to say. So we've gotten about 8 responses so far. We'll give a couple more seconds while we wait to hear from our audience. All right, Jenny, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. Let's go ahead and see what our audience had to say.
Oh, look at that. Got lots of data coming through. And at the lead here, we have using technology to greatest benefit. Well, that's fortunate. We'll be talking a lot about that today. Followed closely by effective communication and collaboration and accountability throughout the organisation. Interesting that we have the 0 response on a learning mindset and acting proactively and strategically. That's curious. I haven't seen that one before. Thank you to the audience for keeping me on my toes. Now, as you've probably gathered, a modern mind is a technology-driven mind. And while technology has been with us for some time now, its presence is going to be felt even more into the future, especially as sites look to ways to better protect their people while also remaining productive, efficient, and sustainable. And while you can see that technology can offer many things, more than this slide could even show, its success is very much contingent upon its people. And when I say its people, I mean the people right at the top, down to those in the front line and those who support on the sidelines. It's important that all of those people embrace the technology and incorporate it into their daily operational activities. And I guess this is where leadership comes in. A modern mind, as you've probably figured, is deliberate, intentional, and persistent. As much as many want the modern mind, it takes work, and it's really not a simple plug and play. For a modern mind to emerge, it really needs leaders that are prepared to challenge existing boundaries, both their own and those of others, encouraging people to think and act beyond what has become the norm or what has always been done. Certainly in the work that we do, sometimes this is actually the very biggest challenge that we encounter, having mindsites to be prepared to give up what's always served them really well and adapt it in a way that it can serve them even better. It often is a roadblock. And interestingly, as Einstein is often quoted as saying, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them. Likewise, the thinking of today is certainly not the same thinking that will take us to tomorrow. To prepare your backyard for the existence of a modern mind also invites our leaders to break down the silos between people, teams, and systems. Often we see in many organizations all of these elements exist almost like a deconstructed coffee, where you have a beaker of water, a beaker of coffee, a beaker of milk. Ideally, these all need to be broken down and made into one, where we can enjoy a wonderful cup of coffee and a seamless operation in our mine sites. By breaking these silos down between people, teams, and systems, we also need leaders to support their people to adapt in the new world. And rather than just relying on words and deeds and promises to make this possible, a modern mind also needs its leaders to build the scaffold for the new context through the creation of consistent expectations and standards. New rules of play, to call it something. For those of you who have listened to our calls before, this model may not be new to you. At Caterpillar Safety Services, we have two core frameworks that underpin the cultural change work that we do. One is the 4 steps of accountability model, which you can see on the screen here. And it invites organisations pondering the move to a modern mind or engaging in any cultural change to define clearly what is expected of everybody in every role. We find very often in many organisations that we visit, this very first step is missing, and people are trying to juggle the norm of their everyday job while also trying to incorporate this new normal. It doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work. The other expectation of this model is once you've clearly defined what's expected, you equip people with the tools, the resources, and the time to actually act out and step into their new role and their new expectations. Another challenge we see with many of our customers that we work with, the desire is to act now. The desire is to recognise the investment into technology now. Sometimes corners are cut, either with the training provided or the time given for people in order to practice and apply the learnings that they've just encountered through their training program. Sometimes the step that's missing is actually the next one, in that the measurement that remains in the organisation in a new normal is the measurement that was applied when we were still in the old guard with the old technology. When we embrace a modern mind, we also need to reconsider what we measure and how we measure. And then finally, recognising that stepping into a modern mind in a new context that involves significant change also involves time and feedback and practice. So this is where the final step of accountability is absolutely critical. Respond. Leaders need to respond to the things that people are trying on and doing well in order to realise the realities of a modern mind. But at the same time, leaders also need to be quick to respond and correct the behaviours that are still sitting in the past, that haven't quite transcended and moved into the context of a modern mind. The second model, developed by a gentleman called Dr. Dan Peterson, an industrial psychologist, and he did a lot of work in the world of safety and operational excellence. And through his work, he developed a model which we very much anchor to, called the 6 criteria of operational excellence. And the beauty of this model, it complements the accountability model by offering an insight into the reach of that model while also presenting some key ingredients for greatest stickability, as we call it, for sustainability, for endurance. Apply to the work that we do with customers moving into a modern mine. We start at the top. And the first thing we challenge our modern mining leaders to do is to be visibly committed. Now, for many of you, that might just sound like, well, I turn up, I wear my safety gear, I provide the funds and the resources for the technology to be built and implemented and go live with. But actually, there's far more required from leaders in a modern mine. Leaders who engage and embrace a modern mine talk to the concepts of a modern mine. If autonomy is one of the ingredients of a modern mine, then the conversation is with every department in every meeting. What are we doing and how are we showing up in order to enable and recognise the promise of autonomous solutions or other technologies that might be supporting your modern mine? Those top leaders are also encouraging their middle managers, be it superintendents in this case, to get actively involved through change. One of the things that we often find is many leaders will step back. This is not the time for stepping back. This is the time for superintendents to get actively involved, to support their people through the process, through coaching and mentoring, role modelling what good looks like and role modelling how it looks like in the modern mine. It's also a time for middle managers to encourage their frontline leaders to get performance focused. And what that means isn't just focusing on the results. It's also focusing on how things are getting done, the process of achieving the value of a modern mine. It's that role which very much also focuses on the steps people are taking. Are we upholding and stepping into the requirements of a future-oriented operation? Or are we still leaning on the principles of a conventional mind? One of the things we often encounter in the work that we do with some of our customers is while they might have an autonomous operation in their backyard, they're still leading it as if they had a manned operation in their backyard. The two don't work very well. The two can't coexist in that regard. You can't lead an autonomous operation with a conventional mining mindset. So this is the time for frontline leaders and all the leaders to get very involved in not just the outcomes and role modeling what's expected and talking about it and encouraging it, but also coaching, supporting and correcting and bringing an operation out of the conventional context into the modern mining context. Naturally then, if all of these leaders are playing their part and doing the right thing, we're encouraging them also to engage their employees actively in the shift to a modern mine. At the end of the day, these are the people who bring the investment to life. And so what's so important is rather than having a whole team of people work behind the scenes, updating your processes and procedures around what it now means to enter the operation, why don't we get the employees involved? They're the ones who have to enact it. They're the ones who have to lead it. They're the ones who will know what could work. So invite them on at the table. Together, those four will get you very close to an operationally excellent modern mine. But we also, as leaders, need to be flexible and understand that a system, whatever system we create about accountability towards leading a modern mine, safety in a modern mine, also needs to be flexible, not only to accommodate the culture you find yourself in, but also the key departments that support the operation. A modern mine looks different in every operation, and so it makes sense that fit-for-purpose processes and procedures are in place. And if they're fit for purpose, the chance of people following them are greater. The chance of people seeing that system positively certainly increases. So here's your chance, once again, to get involved. The question is, as you reflect on those 6 criteria, where is your greatest opportunity for change?
All right, so here's another poll for our audience. As Jenny just mentioned, where is your greatest opportunity for change? So you should be seeing a poll up on your screen. We'd like to hear from you. Go ahead and choose one of the following answers. Is it visible commitment from your top leaders? Is it active involvement from middle managers? Possibly performance-focused frontline leaders? Maybe actively participating employees? A flexible system? Or a system that is positively perceived? So go ahead and answer the question on your screen and let us know, where is your greatest opportunity right now for change? And we'll take a look in a minute. Jenny, I'll hand things over to you. We'll take a look to see what our audience has to say. So we'll give everyone a couple more seconds. Looks like responses are coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about your mine site today, thinking about your work site, what is the greatest opportunity at the moment? So we're getting some really great answers. We're hitting the 40% mark here. A couple more seconds and I'll hand things over. All right, we have 50% of our audience went ahead and submitted for this question. Jenny, handing it over now.
Look at that. Opportunity change, the system to be positively perceived. Yeah, that's always the big one, right? Followed closely behind a flexible system. Oh goodness, it is such a challenge, right? With the desire for standardization, it's very tempting to say a one-size-fits-all. Unfortunately, as we all know, it doesn't work. A system that is flexible to respond to the needs of the various departments and how they need to show up is absolutely critical. And together, if that is in place, employees are actively participating, visible commitment is being displayed and active participation from all leaders across the operation, only then do we get the opportunity to genuinely have that positive perception, not only by our employees, but those that they talk to. And before you know it, if the experience is positive for them in your operation, others want a bit of a taste of what goodness you've got going on in your backyard. Thus the importance of engagement and those 6 criteria really coming to life. I'm going to pivot a little bit and tell you a little bit about a different industry, but it very much relates to the conversation we're having. My first glimpse into the modern landscape was about 15 years ago. And I know it happened earlier than that, but this is when I was a professional in the world of work. So about 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with an aluminium extrusion company with a desire to compete in an increasingly global competitive marketplace. The customer was consolidating its operations to one facility from all around the country and removing their 1940s vintage process lines that involved a team of operators pulling levers, pressing buttons, lifting, packing, stacking the product, and inspecting the quality of all of this effort at the end of the line. All of that to move to a just-in-time technology, or in our case, a modern landscape. This landscape now required operators to enter data into a computer screen, which had never been done before in that facility. Some of the people they discovered were illiterate. So what did that now mean about the role they played? It also involved a whole heap of operators now monitoring and doing a lot of quality checks along the way. There was no more pulling levers and kicking the thing if it broke. There was now an active role in monitoring and making sure that the process just did what it needed to do. There was no active involvement really required of them beyond anything except right at the end. When all of a sudden the packed product appears at the end of the line, someone now needs to make a call to bring the vehicle in that was going to be assigned the delivery and load it on the back of the truck. This particular operation that I was invited to come into could not see, for the life of me, or them in this case, the relevance of an effective change management strategy or process that would support them in preparing their operation for the new context. So as a result, very little was done. Yeah, everyone knew that it was coming because naturally people were moving from smaller operations under this new facility, beautiful new stead, lots of wonderful things going on. But essentially people were told nothing really is going to change. It's kind of going to be the same, just under one big roof with a brand new spanking piece of equipment. That's all they did. Interestingly, I was invited to the opening day where the ribbon was cut by the Lord Mayor and it was all very exciting. A big picnic was held. And then we all went home and the workers went off to work. And while I was getting ready for bed, during their first night shift, I get a phone call from their operations manager asking me if I was free to drop by in the morning and have a chat. What had happened at some stage during their 12-hour shift, in the early hours, in this case, of their 12-hour shift, the operators had switched the just-in-time process into a manual one, reverting their shift and how they work back to something that resembled something they were doing only yesterday and over the last 3 decades. It's a bit funny and a bit of a disaster. But as you can see, change, it does wonderful things and incredible things to the human brain. When encountered with a threat or encountered with the change, some people respond with a stay and play mentality. Let's stay, let's hang around, let's grow, let's learn, let's discover what this new opportunity and this change is about to bring us. For others, change spells bad news, something to resist or run away from, something that clearly my extrusion friends did. You heard what happened to them. You know, while we human beings have evolved, our response to threat really hasn't changed very much. What has changed, however, is the source of that threat. Once upon a time, The threat might have been a big brown bear or a white bear, polar bear, or a saber-toothed tiger. Today, that threat comes in the form of an announcement, a new technology, a new leader or a teammate entering the facility, or an organisational change, to name a few. Today, the threat isn't merely a threat on our own survival. It potentially poses a danger to who we are, our status, what we know, certainty. Human beings love predictability. Human beings love, something that's stable and unchanging in terms of expectations. Little wonder that our extrusion friends went back to what they've known. Today, a change also impacts what we do and how we do it. It threatens our autonomy, or in this case, our freedom of choice. If we don't know, we feel stuck. It also changes how we do the work we do and who we do it with. Relationship, belongingness, being part of a team and a cohesive one is really important for people. The threat also, if not delivered well, impacts why we do it and how. And much of this and how people respond rests with the leader, how they lead, personally respond to and communicate the change, something that was obviously very amiss for my extrusion friends. Now, whether you like to admit it or not, as a leader, people look to you to give them clues on how to survive or thrive in an organisation through the things we say and we don't say, the things that we do and we don't do, the things we reward or punish, and even where you spend your time. Some of you may remember growing up having a brother or a sister or a close friend where one of you starts mimicking what someone else is doing very closely until one of you gets really upset with one another and you say, "Stop!" Well, just as closely as your friend or you looked at your other colleague and mimicked them in what they were doing, your people do the same to you. They look to you to give them clues on how do I need to be around here to survive and thrive. And given that so many of our behaviours are automatic, we don't always think consciously about what we're doing, it means that unconsciously or consciously, as leaders, we are sending a message to the world, to your people, on how to show up in the operation. And before you know it, your world starts to become a reflection of you, warts and all. And those on the call who have young children in their life, oh, you'll know this all too well. Little Seb or Alex come home and suddenly they're opening their mouths and being like you and saying the things you say. Oh, goodness me, where'd you get that from? Hold up the mirror, my friend. It's been there the whole time. So you see, how you show up as a leader really matters. Becoming aware of yourself, calling out and bringing up those unconscious acts and starting to think about how do I react in the face of change, and accepting that reality, whether you like what you see or not, is pivotal in you creating a culture that will support your journey towards a modern mind. Culture and leadership are inextricably linked. You cannot separate one from another and expect a difference. One impacts the other and is impacted by the other. Now, passionate about helping leaders create better possibilities for themselves and their people, Dr. Marilee Adams, a clinical psychology professor and author of this wonderful book and a series of other books, and a founder of the Inquiry Institute, developed a simple yet effective framework designed to help you as leaders see who you are being in times of change and why you're getting the results you're getting. She called this simple framework the choice map. You can Google it and find it online. It's incredibly powerful, one-pager. The choice map invites leaders to look in the mirror, especially in times of change or challenge, and ask themselves a question: who am I being? Am I resisting my new reality, or am I embracing it? Am I being a victim of circumstance, or am I being a master of my destiny? She then invites leaders who are reacting or resisting to choose change, to choose, to stay and play, and offers a series of questions to help them do so. These questions appear in the following slides. Now, this is really, really important. Many years ago, I was supporting many organizations through mergers and acquisitions. And the face and the behaviors of the immediate leader of the people that I was working with determined whether today was going to be a good day or a bad day. If their leader didn't say anything about the merger or the acquisition and what was going on, if the leader didn't say very much and didn't smile or didn't frown but was quite neutral about it, it created angst in the workers, and their performance wasn't effective or great at all. When the leader was then quite real and said, you know what, I don't quite know what's going on, but let's do the best with what we've got and control what we can, morale was better and performance naturally followed. So here are the questions. Choosing to stay and play invites leaders to create possibilities and options. As you can see, the questions speak to what do I want? What are our choices? What assumptions am I making? How else can I think about it? Choice is empowering and uplifting, something your people need to see from you for them to feel confident in what the future holds. While many of you might have stumbled into leadership, that's a response I get very often when I ask leaders, how'd you get here? Well, I kind of just ended up here. Well, you might have stumbled into that role, but to hold your position today is choice. Leadership is choice. Choosing to lead in every day, in every moment, even when there are days when, quite frankly, staying in bed and switching that alarm off might be the preferred option. But to be a leader means to choose to lead, whether you want to or not. Choosing is a conscious choice that's required in a modern mind also. Or in the face of change, are you being reactive? Are you fighting or flying? As you can see by just looking at the questions listed, reacting is divisive. It creates an us and them. An us as the crew or the leader, a them as the instigators of the change. Them could be the technology. Them could be the project leader of the change. Reacting keeps you and your people stuck in the short term before it results in all of you being left behind. The modern mind is here and is beckoning for your attention. Reacting is a mindset of many a conventional mind. What path do you choose? Before we wrap up the webinar, I want to share with you how my meeting the following morning after that disastrous night shift went with my extrusion customer. As I walked through the front doors and into the operation manager's office, he looked up from his desk and he said to me, you were right, Jen. The event last night had me looking in the mirror and asking myself, who was I being? You've rubbed off on me. He continued on saying, I realized in that moment that I wasn't being a leader, that the team needed me. I didn't appreciate that the modern manufacturing landscape in this context involved more than just a new technology and a piece of equipment. I didn't realize how many people would be impacted by the change and how. You were right, Jen. The modern landscape reaches far and wide into departments that I didn't think had anything to do with the production side of the operation. I was only focused on today, with next to no thought on tomorrow. Interestingly, while this was over 15 years ago, I hear very similar things today with many of our customers who are contemplating or transitioning into an automated operation. many don't recognise the reach, the depth and the breadth of an autonomous, digitised technological operation. Many fail to see the role of leadership beyond the department that is majority housing all of these new technologies and advancements. Many don't recognise the role that leadership plays. And so this extrusion manager went on to say, "You don't need to tell me I told you so, Jen. The event last night said that to me already. I called you in the office today, Jen, because what I want you to tell me is, and I'm ready to hear it this time, is what do I need to do to make sure this never happens again?" Might be sitting there like my extrusion operations manager, wondering what this means for them, and are keen to discuss what it might take you and your operation and your people to move to a modern landscape, a modern mining landscape. I'd be keen to hear from you.
Excellent, Jenny. Thank you so much for your insights and such an important topic. Now, it looks like we have a little bit of time left, so we can actually take some questions from the audience here, and we have a few that already have come in. So let's go down the list here. So let's see. It looks like it takes a lot of work to get to a modern mine. Now, considering all the things that are required, where is the first place we should start? Jenny?
That's a really good question. And I would say it kind of depends. But where should we start is each of the leaders having a really good look and getting a sense of what is really happening under their nose. What's happening in the backyard? How well are departments interacting with one another and communicating? How well are departments interacting and working as one together? Also, the question is, how are we information sharing? How are we relating? How are we planning? And how are we as leaders showing up around past changes that we've implemented in organisations? Typically, past performance is a great predictor of what we're likely to get in the future. So having a look at how things are currently in the backyard and having a look at historically how we've responded to change and new developments is probably a good place to start. There's lots of lessons sitting there for any leader or any interested manager to grab hold of and do something with.
Absolutely. And there's another question that's a little bit related. So how soon before we start transitioning into a modern mine should the prep work begin?
It's never too early, right? They often say you cannot start communicating soon enough, and you can never communicate enough. Now, there's more to this than communication, but start now. If you know that change is on the horizon, that a modern mining context is very much on the horizon, whether that means automation or digitization or a new exposure to information that you've never been used to, start now. Start preparing now. A modern mining mindset is very different to a conventional mining mindset, as we spoke about. It is about forecasting. It is about looking forward. It is about joining dots and seeing the world in a new landscape. That can't be turned on overnight. Start now.
And speaking of forecast, what is the most common challenge you've encountered when you're supporting customers that are trying to transition into that modern mine?
Yeah, so the challenge we often face, it's a really good question. Might sound really silly, but it's a really interesting one. Typically, if I reflect on some of our autonomy engagements, we have the challenge of there's a project team who are dedicated towards making this automation a reality. They're the team that will organise the infrastructure, the installation, the getting things working. That's the team that does that. But then there's a whole team that's dedicated, which is partly my team and another team, that's dedicated to preparing the organisation for the new realities, of supporting them, developing the or updating, in this case, new process and procedures around how to enter and exit the mine, who has access, who doesn't, what kind of people do we need, etc., etc. And often the biggest barrier we face is, Jen, we have an operation to keep running. Let's minimize the noise and minimize the interruptions you cause to the operations by pulling people out to get ready for something that's only around the corner. So the barrier and the opportunity is, how do we create a process whereby, yes, you can manage your operations and continue meeting your daily and operational obligations and targets, but at the same time, freeing up and making available the people who are supposed to carry these solutions once Caterpillar and the team exit left.
Now, there is an observation from the audience here. They're saying, now, the leader isn't always necessarily the boss. How do you feel about that?
Oh, well, if the question is coming from the perspective that there are more than one leader on a mine site, then absolutely. The leader can be your supervisor. Sometimes the leader can be the noisiest person in your crew. There are many people who are leaders, and one of the biggest opportunities here is, let's find all those leaders and let them align. Alignment in leadership into what we're moving towards and the difference we want to make is absolutely critical. It is so confusing for a workforce to see one leader say one thing, another leader to say another thing, another leader to say something else. That doesn't help as a customer or an operation is trying to shift into a new context.
Very good. And it looks like we have one more question here. So if you have any other questions speaking to our audience here, enter it on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We're still taking questions. So Jenny, what is a great takeaway today? What is a helpful key message to our leadership that are contemplating making a move to a modern mine?
Nice one. And I probably go back to the very last thing I was speaking about. As a leader, are you prepared to do the work? You know, when it comes to change, often people say, yeah, look, I'm okay with change as long as I don't have to change myself. Now, with you as a leader, people look to you to give them clues on how to be. Maybe the very first step is look in the mirror and let's get real. Are you prepared to make the change? And if you're not quite ready, let's contemplate what would it take. Because if you role model hesitancy and resistance and reluctance, you can be guaranteed that your journey towards a new reality is going to be very difficult, not just for yourself, but for your people.
Right. And the reality here is, and we have a great question that has to do with this. So in your experience, Jenny, what's the biggest gap between corporate and site?
Nice question, one that we encounter a lot. And so often what's interesting, this might not be a reality for some of our medium-sized operations that are contemplating a change in technology and other such things, but very much a reality for some of our larger mining customers, where the decision to move towards a modern mine is actually not the operations decision. The decision comes from someone in the corporation, in corporate, who are contemplating, well, we're moving to a digital context or a modern mining landscape. Let's then invest in a solution and let's select a site that we think could be the site that tries this out. And based on their experiences, we will deploy accordingly across the board. Unfortunately, what we sometimes find is there's a huge divide between what corporate know and understand around what's happening on an operation to the felt reality of those in the operation. Often what we find is an operation gets quote unquote dumped with the opportunity to now go and make this work in and on top of the daily challenges of meeting operational targets, while also trying to implement other initiatives that are going on in the business. And for a project that is so broad and so deep in its reach, not only within the operation and outside the gate and into the community, unfortunately, sometimes our leaders on site don't have the bandwidth and the capacity to do the work that's required because they're trying to juggle the demands that are coming from all layers of an operation or a corporation. and just trying to survive through the day. So the gap between corporate and site is such that one often doesn't really understand the realities of one another. And we're making demands of people that are unrealistic.
All right, Jenny, I don't see any other questions, but we'll go ahead and switch over to the last portion, so our closing. So thanks, Jenny, again, and thank you all for participating in our webinar today. And as a reminder, you can scan that QR code on your screen if you'd like to request a copy of today's presentation, or if you'd like to inquire with Jenny and her team. Now, if you can't scan it with your phone or it's giving you some issues, we've uploaded the PDF version of that QR code on the left-hand side of your screen under the resources section. There's also a survey on your screen on the top right. We'd love for you to tell us how we did. We appreciate your feedback. We value you very much. So please take a moment to complete that. Now, Jenny and everyone in our audience today, thank you again for joining, and remember to mine safely. See you next time.